So we are going to be finishing off spread D today. So if you remember from Monday, we covered a few of the different divisions of the nervous system. So we looked at the central nervous system. We looked at this idea that the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. We talked about their roles. We also looked at the peripheral nervous system, but only really one division of that, which was the somatic. Okay, and we talked about the fact that the somatic nervous system has a role in sensation. It has a sensory function and it has a motor function as well. Okay, so just remember that those are the ones that we've looked at so far. Okay, so what we're doing today is we're going to look at the rest of the divisions of the peripheral nervous system, including what the autonomic nervous system is, as well as the two subdivisions or branches of the autonomic nervous system, which are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So that's what we're going to be going through today. So let's move on now and have a look at first of all, let's define what the autonomic nervous system is, and then we'll define what the sympathetic nervous system is. Okay, let me just admit these people in. Okay, let's move on to the autonomic nervous system. Here we go. Okay, so then let me get rid of those scribbles. Okay, so when we're looking at the when we're looking at the autonomic nervous system, what we're really looking at is this idea that certain functions in our body happen automatically, right? They don't require us to control them. We don't have to think about them happening or them functioning. We know they just happen by themselves. These functions are things like heartbeat, blood flow, respiration, digestion. All of these functions happen in our body without us having to exert any kind of conscious control over them. That's what the autonomic nervous system is about. Also notice that the word autonomic sounds very close to another word, which is automatic. Okay, it's not the automatic nervous system, though it's the autonomic nervous system. But another word that you can think about that's similar to autonomic is automatic. So you can use that as a memory tip to remember that the autonomic nervous system is in charge of those functions that happen automatically, that happen involuntarily. You don't need to exert control over them, okay? And they're those important functions like heartbeat. We don't control our blood flow, for example. It just happens by itself. Respiration, digestion, all of these functions in our body help to keep us alive and are important for our daily functioning and for our survival. Okay. Also, the word autonomic comes from the word autonomous. And autonomous basically means you are self-regulating, or you basically, it's something that regulates itself. It doesn't need outside interference. Okay. So you can remember it like that as well. Okay, so that's basically the main overarching function of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, we also need to remember that the autonomic nervous system is divided into those two subdivisions. So I guess the key words to kind of take away from this slide are, number one, that the autonomic nervous system is involved in regulating those involuntary bodily functions, and you need to know some examples. So maybe learn at least two examples. You can learn the obvious ones like heart rate and blood flow, or heart rate and breathing, which is another word for respiration. Okay, so just learn any two that are easiest for you to remember. Okay, I already talked about self-regulating and autonomous. That's fine. I already talked about this. Yeah, so as long as you understand that when these actions happen, we are not really consciously aware of them happening, that we don't control them, that they are self-regulating or self kind of operating functions, you will know that they are functions of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, those functions happen automatically in a way. Okay, now the autonomic nervous system, like we saw in our hierarchy, we've got our autonomic nervous system, and then it's divided into two further subdivisions. Yeah, one of which is the sympathetic nervous system, and one of which is the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's basically what we're going to go through for the rest of this spread today. So let me just go to the next slide. Right. The first subdivision of the autonomic nervous system is called the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is really important, particularly when we are faced with some kind of a threat, particularly when we are faced with some kind of emergency, particularly when we're faced with any kind of stressor. Okay. In a lot of textbooks, they talk about things like, being chased by a dog, or, walking in the forest and seeing a bear in front of you. Those are all threats and emergencies, but they're pretty extreme. On a day-to-day basis in our normal life, though, even when we encounter like a stressor, like for example, let's say you've come to school out of uniform, Okay, and you see your year level coordinator or the discipline coordinator on the other side of the hallway or on the other side of the corridor. Even though that person is not technically a threat, okay, as extreme as, you know, a bear or like, you know, a wild dog running down the road, there's still a stressor. Okay, there's still something that makes you feel stressed or intimidated or threatened. And for that reason, seeing them can be enough to activate your sympathetic nervous system. Now, you might have heard of something called the fight-flight response. Can anyone explain to me or give me a quick description or quick rundown in the chat? What do we mean by the fight-flight response? You might have come across this term in lower level science when you did science in year 9 or year 8, in biology maybe. What do we mean by the fight-flight response? Just give me a simple definition as to what it means. Yeah. So in an emergency situation, the fight flight response helps someone decide whether they're going to run away or whether they're going to actually fight back. Yeah. It's about when you're approached with something, whether you fight it or you run off. Yeah. It's basically your instincts in a life or death situation. Yeah. Excellent answers there. Good work. So that's basically what the fight flight response is. Okay. It's basically our innate biological survival response when we're faced with a threat or an emergency or a stressor. Okay. A stressor is just something that causes or produces stress. So basically, when we're looking at the sympathetic nervous system, when we are faced with an emergency threat or stressor, our sympathetic nervous system's main role is to prepare our body for action. Okay, that action can take different forms. That action can mean that we directly confront the stressor or we run away from the stressor. There's also another function called the freeze response, but we don't learn about that at year 10, but you might learn about that if you continue to do psychology or biology later on, okay? But we'll just stick to the fight-flight response, just those two main responses there. Okay, so these changes basically allow us to better manage danger, stresses, or threats. So for example, if I'm walking in the forest, I'm doing some hiking or I don't know, something, and then I see a bear kind of like 300 meters away from me standing behind a tree, I can actually decide whether I'm going to confront the bear, okay, head on, and I'm actually going to be like, okay, yep, I'm going to confront this bear. I'm going to stand my ground, or I can decide whether I'm going to run away. Usually the decision that we make will depend on the size of the threat compared to us, how intimidating that threat is to us, and basically our belief in our ability to cope with that stressor or cope with that threat. If we think we can cope with it and we think we can fight the bear, we'll go ahead and do that. If we don't, we might run away. If we look at a real life example, if you're out of uniform and you're standing in the corridor and your coordinator's on the other side, if you're not really scared of standing up to your coordinator or, you know, or you've got a proper excuse or something like that, or you've got a note from your parent, you might not run away. You might actually choose a fight response. But if you are in the wrong and you don't have a note from your parent and, you know, you've been warned before, you might actually just run away. Okay, that's a flight response. So again, there's no one response that we ever actually engage in the same way. Yeah, so for example, yeah, if you've got a jumping spider in your room, some of you might decide to run away from the spider. Some of you might decide, okay, where's the nearest piece of tissue so I can take it outside? Okay, it depends on who you are and how well you feel you can cope with stresses. Okay, so that's the basic idea, and that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. That is its main role. Okay, in simple terms, the sympathetic nervous system prepares the body by making these changes in bodily functioning. Okay, if I decide to fight the bear head on, I'm going to have a lot of adrenaline pumping through my body. I'm going to have a lot of energy or glucose or sugar going to my muscles, allowing them to move. Okay, I'm going to have a lot of increase in my heart rate because that's actually increasing the blood that's flowing around my body, increasing the oxygenated blood that's reaching. Okay, so all of that stuff is basically helping the sympathetic nervous system to help prepare your body for action. Action meaning either fight or a flight response. So that's basically the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now we can't always, let's say that I'm walking in the forest and there's a bear and I see the bear like 200 meters away from me or whatever. And, all my bodily functions go up. My sympathetic nervous system prepares my body for action. Can you guys tell me, give me the answer to this question. Is it okay for our sympathetic nervous system to be activated all the time? Like even when there's not a threat in the environment, and maybe give me a reason why. You'd be a mess. Yeah, that's a good answer, but more. In terms of our actual functioning, in terms of our survival, why would having all your bodily activation, but all your bodily physiological changes at high, like in overdrive or in extreme levels, why would that be bad? Yeah, it would lead to constant anxiety. You'd always try to fight anything that comes at you. It would lead to exhaustion. Exactly. Okay. You would be wasting all of your body's resources and all of those stress hormones. Okay. So that's good. Also, the more you stress and the more your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, the more you start, being jittery and on edge for everything, the more likely you are to die of a stress-related illness. Again, this is why people, you might see on the news, people literally will eat, put trees in their smoothies for breakfast. They have so much green happening in every meal that they eat. They're so healthy. They go gym every day. And then you hear, okay, this person died of a heart attack. It's because of stress-related illnesses, okay? And it's because of the fact that when your sympathetic nervous system is always activated, it indicates that you're always encountering emergencies or threats, or always encountering stressful things in your environment that set off your fight-flight response. Okay, for example, people that are in constantly anxiety-inducing environments, for example, people that are in relationships where domestic violence occurs, are constantly in this kind of fight or flight response because they're constantly surrounded by intimidating stimuli, threats, stresses or stressful things that cause them to produce that stress response. And that's why these people are more likely to experience illness or death because of stress-related illness than someone who's not in that same situation. Anyway, that's interesting to talk about. And that's something to do with stress. If you're planning to do psych in year 12, you will learn a lot more about stress and the impact of it on the body. Okay, so that's the sympathetic nervous system. And it has to switch off at some point or the other. The sympathetic nervous system cannot be on for the whole day simply because it will lead to us developing a lot of illness because of stress, and it will lead to a lot of exhaustion for the body because the body is always on edge. It's always in that overdrive state. So how do we fix this, or how do we basically kind of switch things back to normal? How do we bring back that state of homeostasis? Okay, you might have learned or heard of the word homeostasis in lower year levels. Homeostasis is just this idea of a normal state of functioning. So when you're at rest, okay, when you're not stressed, when you're not encountering any threats, what is your normal state of functioning? Like a normal heart rate, a normal breathing rate, all that kind of stuff. This is where the parasympathetic nervous system comes into place. Okay, notice that the word para means something that goes against or is opposite to something else. Okay, for example, when we talk about paranormal activity, it's activity or things that is not normal. Okay, that's something we don't normally see. So parasympathetic is the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system because it actually comes in, and rather than preparing the body for action, it comes in after the action has passed. After the sympathetic nervous system has done its job, the parasympathetic nervous system comes in and calms down the body. Okay, you can remember this using a memory tip, remembering that P for parasympathetic, P for the fact that it brings your body back to a peaceful state, the state that you were in before the threat was encountered or before the danger had come into your path. Okay, so that's what the memory tip is for this one. So P for parasympathetic, P for a peaceful state. Okay, the parasympathetic nervous system is thus also responsible for maintaining that normal day-to-day bodily functioning. And for that reason, we say it does have a role in homeostasis. You don't need to mention the word homeostasis if we ask you to describe this, but it's just there for your knowledge. If you just say bringing back the body to a state of normal functioning or calming the body down, that's enough. Another memory tip you can also use to remember the function of the parasympathetic nervous system is this idea of rest and digest. So when we talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, we talk about the fact that it brings us peace, and it brings us peace or brings our body back to a peaceful state because it allows us to go back to a state where we can rest and where we can digest. As we're going to learn about in the next slide, usually when you're dealing with a lot of stressful situations, or when you're dealing with dangers or threats in your environment, a lot of your important bodily functions, like digestion, for example, actually get shut off or actually decrease. And so when the stressor has passed and you come back to a parasympathetic kind of nervous system activation, you're able to then continue to rest and continue to digest. So that's just another tip there for you. Yeah, that's what the parasympathetic nervous system does. Okay, just because the parasympathetic nervous system isn't the first system to be activated in the face of danger, it doesn't make it any less important. In fact, if we didn't have the parasympathetic nervous system, we would basically always be stressed, always be on edge. And that would, like I said before, increase our risk of those stress-related diseases. Okay, so that's the basic idea there. Okay, when we're looking at the next slide, this is again just summarizing for you the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're just looking at this idea of, just the memory tips again, and basically just looking at the definitions. Now, if you don't want to learn this entire slide and this entire slide for the test, you can literally just cross them out and you can just learn this one. Okay, this one literally summarizes for you what the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are for, and basically what they do. Okay, so that's just a shortcut slide for you if you want, or a summary slide. Okay, cool. So that's showing you the person and the bear. So in this case, the bear is the threat and the person is showing that kind of, looks like they're showing a flight response or making their way towards a flight response there. Okay, because they seem to be running away. Alrighty. Some of the changes that occur in our body. Now, we know that when these respective nervous systems are activated, they do lead to physiological changes in the body. And these physiological or biological changes that occur in the body are what actually allow us to be able to either deal with the stressor or be able to calm ourselves down after the stressor has passed. Okay, so with reference to the sympathetic nervous system, you can see that's on the right-hand side here. We can talk about, all the different functions, but you don't need to learn all of them, okay? If you just learn maybe at least, let's say 3, okay? Just learn any 3 that are easiest for you to remember, okay? For example, dilating pupils. When we see a danger in front of us, our pupils actually dilate, which means that they get bigger, and that allows more light to come into our eyes to allow us to see our surroundings better. For example, when you are, encountering a stressor, epinephrine is another word for adrenaline. Adrenaline is released, okay? Adrenaline is one of the stress hormones that gets us pumped up and ready to deal with the stressor, either ready to fight it head on or ready to run away. Okay, and the opposite can be said for the parasympathetic. So whatever we have in the right-hand side here for sympathetic, the opposite applies for the parasympathetic. For example, when we face a stressor or a threat, the sympathetic nervous system is activated to increase our heartbeat after the stressor has passed. So for example, after the bear has, gone back into its cave and it's no longer there, it's no longer threatening you, you come back to a parasympathetic nervous system. So your heartbeat gets slow, gets back to a normal kind of resting heartbeat rate there, okay? So that's basically showing you that we're coming back to a normal level, okay? You need to know any 3. Although it looks like you've got to know 3 + 3, 6 altogether, it's actually just 3 you need to know, because if you know one, you automatically know the other, because they are, like I said, opposites of one another. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay, this is just giving you a little more detail in case you want that extra detail there. For the ones that you learn, look, if you decide to learn the dilate pupils one as one of them, then you can just get the explanation for the dilate pupils one here, which I told you before is about, making sure more light enters the eyes and making sure that we're able to better see the stressor that we're dealing with. So whichever one you decide to learn, just only learn the explanation or the description for that particular one that you choose to learn. So if I choose to learn about the dilation of pupils, about the stopping of the digestion, okay, and about, let's say, the release of adrenalines, I would only learn these 3 for each one, okay? So that's the basic idea, just to give you kind of less content to deal with, I suppose. All right, so those are the 3 that you would need to know if you were choosing those particular ones to learn. Listen, we're giving it up to you. We're not going to ask you about a specific one in specifically. We're just going to ask you for usually like any 2 or any 3. All right, so just learn the ones that are easiest for you to remember. Okay, so I think having said that, I think we're done with the content. We're just going to watch a quick video now of a little cartoon clip from The Simpsons, and then we're just going to answer some questions in questions with reference to that. Okay, so that's what we're going to do now. So I might just pause the recording here for us to watch the video. Okay, guys, what do we think? Usually if we were in class, we would have done this in groups of 2 or 3. but that's okay. So what do we think about the first question? What was the division of the nervous system that was activated when Bart sees Homer in this specific situation, not when he sees Homer in a normal basis, but in this specific scenario that we saw in the cartoon? Can anyone tell me in the chat box? We've already got some good answers there, but I want more people contributing as well, as I always say. So what do we think, guys? It's just one word that we need to put there. So let's pretend I don't know the answer, but someone needs to give me the answer now. So let me know, what division is it? What do we think? It is our sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so obviously in this case, Homer is seen as a threat or a danger to Bart because Bart has done something that makes Homer dangerous, which is stealing Homer's jar of change. So the sympathetic nervous system will be activated. Okay, that's the answer for the first question. Okay, what about the second question? What specific action does Bart take when this nervous system division is activated? Remember, we said there are two main actions that the sympathetic nervous system can prepare us to do. Okay, and can anyone tell me what action he decides to take? And I think I'm going to start calling on names because I can only see one or two people here contributing, which is not fair. So let me just pick a name at random. Let's see. Okay, Amin, Arman, let's see, who else do we have here? Maybe Lujane or Sidra. Can one of you guys answer? I will be trying to make sure everyone is contributing. So don't worry, you're not the only 4 I've picked. Can any one of you tell me the answer for question 2? What specific action? So we talked about 2 specific actions that we normally can engage in when the sympathetic nervous system is activated. Yeah, a flight action. Good, excellent. So we're going to just write here, flight. Okay, and it's obvious that he chose flight because he's running away. Okay, he obviously knows that he can't really fight Homer, particularly given Homer is a lot bigger than him. So flight is the decision that he decides to do. Okay, the next question. Identify 2 physiological or biological changes taking place in Bart's body when this division of the nervous system is activated. Okay, so when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, what are the 2 physiological or biological changes that could be taking place in his body? So just name them or just identify them. Okay, I've got a good answer in the chat box already, but I need everyone contributing. So what do we think, guys? Someone who hasn't contributed already. Give me an answer. What do we think? Or even just one change. If anyone can just give me one change, then we can jot it down here. Yep, his heart rate increases. That's a good one. We can also talk about, yes, his body producing or secreting more adrenaline. Yep, so increased release of adrenaline. What else can we say? Let's just put in one more. What else do we think? Come on, everyone. Where are you? Are you asleep? Come on, come on. I need more points. Quick, quick, quick. There was one related to eyes. Can anyone remember what that was? Or the one related to, I don't know, something related to a processing of food. What is it? Come on, quick. Yes, good. Pupils dilating. Very good. So pupils dilating to allow him to see better, to see the threat better. Yes, yes, digestion decreasing. So shutting off unnecessary bodily functions to focus on dealing with the stressor. Okay, good. I'm happy with that. We have at least about 4 there. So not 4, yeah, 4. So that's good. All right, guys, question 4. After Bart escapes from Homer and he's safely on the bus and, you know, Homer's kind of crashed into that garage door and, you know, Homer's not able to catch Bart and he's obviously no longer a threat, which division of the nervous system would then become active and why is this important? So first thinking it, can as many people as possible put in the chat box what nervous system is activated when Homer is no longer able to catch Bart, when Bart successfully escapes. Give me the name of that nervous system. Yep, got some good answers already. Good. It is the parasympathetic nervous system. Good work. Nervous system. Okay. Now, why is it important? We talked about this. Why is it important for the parasympathetic nervous system to come into play? Why do we think it's important? Yep, the parasympathetic nervous system is important. Because otherwise Bart would have been on edge physically the whole bus ride. Okay, so we can say that the parasympathetic nervous system thus brings back a normal physiological state, or allows Bart's body to return back to a normal physiological state. Okay, so that's the basic idea there. Good work. All right, last question. I'm just going to check this here. All right, the answer to the last question, identify 2 physiological changes that would take place when the nervous system that you mentioned in question 4 is activated. So now we're talking about what are 2 physiological changes that would come into play once our parasympathetic or once Bart's parasympathetic nervous system was activated. Remembering, guys, that one effect of one nervous system there, the effect of the sympathetic is almost always the opposite of the parasympathetic. So if we look at the functions that we already talked about here, we would say that the opposite would apply here. So where we have a dilation of pupils here, we would have a constriction. Constriction means getting smaller of pupils for question 5. Okay. Yes, correct. The heart rate would decrease. That's good. So basically the opposite. Okay. The opposite of one another, because remember these 2 systems work in conjunction, but also in opposition to one another. Okay, they're never really both activated at the same time. It's always a case where one is more dominant than the other. And in most cases, when we're not stressed, it's the parasympathetic nervous system that is more dominant because it's allowing for that homeostasis. Okay, for example, your digestion will resume or will increase. Okay, we can talk about, for example, heart rate decreasing. So when it was increased before, the heart rate will now be decreased. And whatever other functions. So there'll be return to a normal breathing rate. You won't be huffing and puffing and, you know, panting there anymore. So what did I write? Heart rate decrease. Yes. So that's, yeah, the question is that why people throw up when they're nervous? Yes, that's correct. Because generally when you're nervous, it's similar to stress. It does lead to a change in your physiological functioning. This is also the reason why people who are under a lot of stress constantly experience a lot of digestive issues, experience a lot of headaches, because there is, the body is out of sync. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system is constantly getting activated and it's constantly leading to, you know, a heightened physiological functioning and then going back to normal, heightened and going back to normal. And your body is not like programmed to deal with that much stress on such a frequent basis. Yep. So that's, yeah, it's a good way to understand how stress does affect our health at the end of the day. Cool. So those are the kind of questions, guys, that we will most likely kind of be asking you in the SACN exam as well. So these are the general kinds of questions that you need to be familiar with. So if you thought that this was pretty straightforward or pretty easy, these are the kinds of key skills that I suppose would be assessing you on, okay, with reference to this particular topic. Okay. Cool. So I think, let me just check. Yeah. Okay. So we are done with content for today. So I'm just going to stop the recording here.